Hi there, it's Mr. Clark. Welcome to lesson 10.4.1 on binary form. So, when we're talking about binary form, we're really just talking about two contrasting things. At its most basic level, a binary form has two sections, both of which are repeated. So you have an A section that's repeated and a B section that's repeated. So let's listen to an example first, and then we will go back and talk about it. It's a pretty short recording. This is the Minuet in G major from the Notebook for Anna Magdalena Bach. And this is Ton Koopman on harpsichord. Half cadence landed on D there. And a perfect authentic cadence. We repeat our A section. A little bit of ornamentation on the repeat. More than a little. Yep. Now B section, clearly different material, but also clearly the same piece. Ooh, we're in D. Now heading back towards G. Repeat our B section with ornamentation. Yep. So we have taken a listen. Clearly it has two sections to it. So how can we analyze binary forms? What are some characteristics that we might observe? Well, first off, we need to know that it's binary. So the big thing is to look for those two sets of repeats. It doesn't necessarily always happen. One or both of the repeats may be written out. If you wanted to write it out with all that ornamentation, you'd have these 16 bars, then you'd write it again with ornamentation. So that's a possibility. A lot of the times, especially in the Baroque era, the ornamentation is just improvised the second time. Speaking of the Baroque era, binary form is particularly common there. A lot of dances in the Baroque era tended to be in binary form, which is also why a lot of them tend to be in 4, 8, 16 bar chunks, because you want dances to have a predictable phrase lengths. The ways that we analyze binary form are harmonically and thematically. So let's first talk about harmonies, and this deals primarily with the first half. One of the characteristics of binary form is that there's some sort of harmonic motion away from the tonic key, so some sort of tonicization or modulation, which is why we haven't really talked about it until now when we've talked about tonicization and modulation. This can happen in one of two ways. In a sectional binary form, your A section remains in tonic and ends on a perfect authentic cadence in your first key. That is, it can kind of stand on its own. Like if it ended there, it'd be like, okay, that was kind of short, but that makes sense. If it's a continuous binary form, then your A section modulates away from tonic. It either ends on a half cadence or it tonicizes or modulates another key. If you're in major, usually, most often it would go to 5. It would go to either flat 3 or minor 5 if you were in minor, probably. But the reason it's called continuous is that the music couldn't end there. It doesn't feel like it's done. It needs to continue on to another phrase. So, taking a look at this one, we reach a perfect authentic cadence in G, which was our original key. So this would be sectional. We could pick out this section. It could stand on its own. In either case, the second B section is going to have some sort of harmonic disturbance followed by a return to tonic. If it's continuous, it probably continues on in the key that the first one left off in. In this case, we do continue on in 1, but we quickly move to a half cadence and then a perfect authentic cadence in D, which is 5, which is, a place we would expect to go. So it's sectional, and then it explores D major before returning to G in that last phrase. The other thing that we think about is the thematic structure, and here we're going to primarily look at the second half. So when we're talking harmonically, so harmony can be sectional or continuous, and then thematically can either be simple or rounded. Those are your two choices. So two different dimensions, one harmonic, one thematic, and they both have two choices. So thematically, if it's a simple binary form, either A and B are totally unrelated, where it's like you have A material and you have B material, or they're always similar, where it's like this is basically the same with some harmonies changed, whatever. So either A, B, or A prime. In a rounded binary form, material from A appears again at the end of B, after unrelated material in the harmonic disturbance. So here in this piece, heard the first section twice, then it goes this doesn't sound quite like anything we've heard before. It's, it's similar, it's related, but it's not the same. I wouldn't call it the same. So then it's very nice, but it doesn't really relate to anything that came before. So I would call this simple, and I think we'll be looking at a rounded in a moment. So this one I would call sectional, and then simple. So that's what's going on here. That's basically what I've said. One thing I do want to point out is that this is a very broad overview of the piece. If we can still talk about phrases, we can still talk about individual harmonies, this is just one layer up, where it's like, hey, this is a simple sectional binary form. It's a new lens, it's a new tool in our analytical toolbox. So here we're going to now look at another piece, the trio of Ludwig van Beethoven's Minuet No. 6 in C major. So just give me a moment here. All right, so let's give this a listen. Coming in from the previous part of the piece. We repeat. So I'm going to pause it there. The first half, we can think about our harmonic structure. Whether it's sectional, it ends in the same key it started, or whether it's continuous, where it has to continue on because it modulated or tonicized somewhere else. So we start in C, 5 5 1 1 1 1 2 1, pretty clear. And then by the end, oh wait, we've ended in G. We've gone to 5. We've gone to the key of 5. So this would be continuous. So let's see what happens moving forward. Okay. All right. So, thinking about this, in our second half, we want to look whether it's simple or rounded. It definitely starts out differently, but then here at the end, dum da dum, dum da dum, da da dum, dum da dum, it's pretty much the same thing as up here, but transposed so that we cadence in C. So I would call this rounded. And another thing that, if we want to be extra fancy, I forgot the footnote down here, a continuous rounded binary can also be called balanced if material from the end of A comes back transposed to tonic at the end of B, which is exactly what happens here. We have material leading to the key of G, and here it leads back to the key of C. So it's repeated and transposed. So, balanced. But that's just kind of an extra bonus if it satisfies all these criteria. You get an extra bonus prize of calling it balanced. The last thing I want to talk about is how this harmonic disturbance works at the beginning of your B section. We're going to go to the Austrian music theorist Joseph Riepel, who described 3 common strategies for writing and analyzing this harmonic disturbance. He wrote in 1755 and gave them rhyming Italian names, which are simply delightful. It's not an exhaustive list of everything, but it's a pretty good starting point for characterizing the different techniques that composers would use, especially at the time. So your first option is ponte, which translates to bridge, where you kind of have, if you think about a bridge, it like crosses water, and it's flat. You want bridges to be flat pretty much. If they're not flat, then it's not an amazing bridge. So what that's trying to say is that it's just a single prolonged harmony, usually the dominant, where it just kind of hangs out somewhere, and then we come back to tonic for the very end. So here's an example from a Mozart minuet. Looks like our home key is D, but here we start. So we hang out on our dominant, our 5 chord, for pretty much the entire time until we come back at the very end of that harmonic disturbance. So that would be an example of pretty much doing the same thing, ponte. Next option is monte. If you're thinking of mountains, you're climbing upwards. So this would be some kind of ascending sequence, probably ascending fifths with some applied chords. So here we have another Mozart minuet. Our home key is F. And then do the same thing. So we just repeated it up a major second. So that would be a monte. And then if we can go flat, we can go up, or we can go down, like a bubbling fountain, or fonte. So probably a descending fifth sequence is what you would see here. Last but not least, our home key is C. And then repeat it down a second. So your options are ponte, monte, and fonte. So we've talked about 3 ways to analyze binary forms. The harmony, whether the first section ends on tonic, which would be sectional, or whether it ends off tonic, going somewhere else, which would be continuous. Then you have your thematic, where does it repeat in the second section? If yes, it would be rounded. If no, that would be simple. And then we talked about this harmonic development section in the middle, where your choices are ponte, monte, and fonte. So 3 useful things you can say about pretty much any binary form. Oh, that's kind of out of frame. Sorry about that. So take a look at some binary forms, and I'll see you next time.